Hello again. Do you remember last week when we were reading in the first book of nature about plants? We're going to do that again today. But before I start, I wanted to remind you about this page. Do you remember how we discussed that various types of insects and animals are visitors to flowers? And they visit the flowers and then take some of the pollen from the flowers and go to another flower and they pollinate that flower. That's a big word. We are going to find out after the bee takes the pollen, or whatever animal it is or insect takes the pollen, what happens to the pollen. So let's start right here. And the first part of this is just a review that this of the stigma, and the pistil is this, and the stamen is the part right here. So you'll hear those words: stigma, stamen, and pistil. It says, regarding this picture right here, a bee has left pollen on this stigma right there. The pollen came from another poppy. Now we're looking at this picture. Each grain of pollen grows a tube down inside the pistil. There are ovules inside the pistil. And then we go down here and we're looking inside of this now in this picture. This is the inside of this. And it says this pistil is cut in half. So if we took this and we sliced it in half, this is what we would see. And we would see the pollen grain up here and the pollen tube. All of these little circles are the ovules. And it says, when a tube reaches an ovule, the inside of the pollen grain moves out of the tube and joins with the ovule. Okay, let's look at this one. The ovules in the pistil have been fertilized by the pollen. The fertilized ovules will grow into poppy seeds. So the seeds are grown inside, and after the pollination, the petals and the stamens die. Now let's go over here. And it says the flowers on the poppy plant can be fertilized only when an insect brings pollen from another poppy plant. A poppy flower cannot use its own pollen to fertilize its own ovules. The pollen will not grow tubes down into the pistil. So this poppy, it can't use its own pollen, but this poppy can use the pollen of this poppy. Poppy pollen will not grow tubes in buttercup pistils. So the pollen from this will not grow the pistils in this kind of flower, but it will for another poppy. Okay. Many flowers are like the poppy. They do not use their own pollen to fertilize themselves. Pollen must be brought from another flower of the same kind by visitors or by the wind. A single flower of the yellow mountain saxifrage, I don't know if I'm saying that right, can never fertilize itself because the stamens die before the stigmas are ripe. So the flowers on this plant are less than a week old, and only the stamens are ripe. The flowers on this plant are more than 11 days old. The stigmas are ripe, the stamens are dead. Okay, you see the difference? What's different? Yeah. This one's not ripe, this one is, and that means that the stamen are dead. And you can see right there the old stamen. Okay, let's go over to this side. The pollen of this bee the pollen of this bee orchid is moved only by male Eucerobees. Oh, am I so sorry? I don't know how to pronounce some of these. Eucerobees. But if no Eucerobees visit the orchid, it will use its own pollen to fertilize itself. So the orchid, which is what this page, the kind of flower on this page, is a little bit different than the other ones that we looked at. This bee orchid looks and smells like a female Eucerobe. This is how the orchid attracts male Eucerobees. If a male bee lands on a flower, the two pollen sacs stick onto the bee's head. Can you see that? It's kind of interesting right there. Now we're down here. This is another male Eucerobe. He has pollen on his head from another bee orchid. Do you see it on his head? Okay, now we're down here looking at this one. As he lands on this flower, the pollen will stick onto the stigma and fertilize the flower. But, this is the interesting part, I think. If no bees visit this bee orchid, it will fertilize itself. And this picture down here shows us how it does it. The stamens bend over and the pollen sacs touch the stigma. Can you see that happening? Every time I read this book, I say the same thing. God is such an amazing creator. I'm just so thankful for his beautiful creation, and I look forward to heaven because the beautiful creations will be even more beautiful. Anyways, I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.